Working across the aisle in politics isn't something you see very often these days, especially in America. But this weekend in Halifax, 2 U.S. senators led a bipartisan delegation north. One is a Republican and one is a Democrat. Both are from northern border states where there are serious concerns with the Canadian border.
There are many stretches of the border, particularly in New Hampshire, that are remote, that are sparsely populated, and unlike many other borders, not militarized. That means our northern border is vulnerable to exploitation.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Senator Risch and Senator Shaheen. It's a rare thing in this day and age to have a bipartisan interview, so we appreciate the chance to speak to both of you.
We appreciate it too. It's not rare for us. We do this a lot.
Well, it's great. It's great to be able to hear both perspectives and have the conversation, which so many people I think feel is lacking in politics today with all the polarization. I have to start with questions about the Canada-U.S. relationship because, of course, our viewers are Canadians, and I know you're both great friends of Canada. There's a lot of concern with some of the rhetoric from the incoming administration, and some of it valid rhetoric. Concerns about Canadian defense spending, which has been nowhere near the 2% target that, of course, we're committed to. The government has released a plan. We're not getting there till about 2032. If the numbers are right, which some assessment says they're not, they're low. How critical, Senator Risch, do you think this issue is going to be with the Trump administration? Really critical.
He's been very critical of all of the allies who weren't stepping up. When he took office, there were only 3 of the 30 NATO countries that were making 2%. He was very tough on them, as you know, and now we're up to just a handful that aren't. And look, this is something we all agreed to. NATO is incredibly important to Canada, to the United States, to the other 30 countries, and especially today, our arch enemy that continues to move backwards towards the Stone Age is threatening us with nuclear weapons. The North is incredibly important to you and to us to protect. So this is really important, and I would say to Canada, look, I deal with our European allies all the time, as does Jeanne, and we deal with countries that are poorer than Canada, that are smaller than Canada, and they're making their 2%. And it's just a matter of Canada's going to have to step up. This isn't easy. It isn't easy for us either. It certainly isn't easy for a lot of those European countries. But this is the NATO alliance is the strongest, most successful military alliance in the history of the world. We belong to it. Canada belongs to it. There are people on this planet that would love to belong to this, but we've got an obligation to each other, and that obligation today is more needed than it's ever been needed. President-elect Trump has in the past said that he'd be willing to essentially blow NATO up or leave countries that don't pay their fair share, as he puts it, to their own defenses. Senator Shaheen, what do you think the risk is to Canada if we don't get to 2% sooner rather than later?
Well, I don't see it that way. And in fact, we had a lot of discussion yesterday with Minister Blair talking about the commitment that Canada has made and the need to do that because of Canada's own defense and the threat in the Arctic in particular. We know that Russia and China have designs on the Arctic, and we think it's very important for us to work together for the reasons that Jim said, that this is in our interest in the United States, it's in Canada's interest, it's in the interest of all of those NATO members to see that we remain strong because of the threats that we face. I know that you know Donald Trump well, Senator Risch. What kind of actions do you think he may take if Canada doesn't move fast enough or doesn't make that 2%? Is there a possibility that the Americans take a more assertive role in the defense of Canada without our input? Is there a chance of tariffs on Canadian goods? What does that look like? You know, I don't think we ought to talk about that. I think what we ought to talk about is how's Canada going to get there.
But we're pretty worried about what he might do.
Well, if that's the case, then what you ought to do is get to the 2%. That's the easy solution there. I don't think you should look at it from the negative standpoint. I can tell you this: the 2032, if Donald Trump was sitting right here, you'd get a big guffaw out of him on 2032, because that's a long ways for what we're dealing with in the world right now. That's an eternity down the road for us. This needs to be done now. So I would urge my Canadian friends, don't talk about what's going to happen if you don't. Talk about how you're going to do it, because this is really existential for NATO. It's important to NATO. People in Canada certainly have to understand the threat that comes to us from the north. Look, if they come after us, they're going to come from the north. They're going to come after you from the north, and we're next after that. So this is something we've got to really work on. Now, the good news is we have tremendous cooperation with Canada's defenses. They talk all the time, they're planning all the time, they want to move forward, and I know they want to be able to do more. But but public policy in Canada has got to shift on this, or it's going to be a serious problem.
And our partnership with NORAD is really critical as we talk about threats from the north. That's the only joint command in the world. The Canadians and the United States, we have a joint command at NORAD where we check for threats coming in from the north. And so that's a very important partnership. It's in both of our interests to continue that and to make the contributions that are necessary to ensure that that's updated and is addressing the new threats.
Really critical for Canadian sovereignty as well, because of course we don't have the same capabilities in the U.S. and something that has been treasured by Canada for years. Another thing that we've treasured is an open border, the longest undefended border in the world that we share. Tons of people and goods cross it every day. So do some people who are not crossing legally. 19,000 people crossed from Canada into the United States illegally over the past year. That's more than the previous 17 years combined. Tom Homan has come out and said that Canada is a potential national security threat to the United States. It could be a gateway for terrorism, given some of the arrests here of people in Canada recently who had immigrated and were subsequently charged with terrorism. Senator Risch, do you have a sense of concerns in the Trump administration that's incoming about the integrity of Canada's immigration system and the border?
You know, I think it's a matter that needs work. I'll give you that. But it is, I can tell you, this is de minimis compared to our southern border. Our problem is our southern border. And by the way, that southern border is not only a problem for us, it's a problem for you too, because as you noted, once they get into the United States, it's relatively easy to cross. We were both governors of northern states, and we've had a great relationship on our Canadian border in Idaho. And that's true as I talk to governors across the north. We want to keep it that way. Canada is a great friend, our cousins, our allies. We want to keep it that way, and it should be kept that way. I wouldn't focus too much on some of the harsh language that's coming out of there. I can tell you this: the administration is going to focus on immigration. That was an issue in the campaign. Some would argue that that's probably one of the things that put Trump over the top to get elected, both in 16 and now in 24. They will focus on that. They're going to shut that southern border down, I mean, period, and it's going to be done very quickly. When he left office last time, he fought lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, but he finally got that thing closed. He's going to go back to having a closed border on the southern border.
How do they approach the northern border, Senator Shaheen, if they're not happy with the security there?
Well, I'm not privy to the inside information of the Trump administration, but I can tell you that the northern border is a concern for us in New Hampshire. We share trade, we share so many aspects of the relationship with Canada in New Hampshire. A third of our citizens are of Canadian descent. But we have seen over the last couple of years an increase in people coming across into New Hampshire, into the section of the border between New York and Maine has increased dramatically, the people coming across. And there's a lot of cooperation with Canada on trying to address that. One of the areas that we've worked on is the communications, because we have in northern New Hampshire, communications are a challenge. Being able to have all the law enforcement agencies talk to each other, being able to talk because of the bans that are restricted in Canada. So we're hoping that we can address some of those concerns, and as I said, we've been working with Canadian officials and we've seen some progress, but it's something that we've got to work on because we want to maintain that positive relationship. We want to maintain the longest border in the world that's secure, and so we need to work together to make that happen.
Senator Risch and Senator Shaheen, thank you both so much for joining us today and sharing your thoughts. We appreciate it and hope to see you back in Canada soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.